How would you say the speed of the decision making compares in the Apollo era to, say, in the Columbia tragedy or with the Challenger accident?
Yeah.
Columbia, there were no decisions.
Compare.
I'll compare them, but there weren't any decisions made in Columbia that made any sense. The decisions were not to make any decisions, so they kept flying instead of asking the Air Force to move one of their assets over to take pictures of the wing. So there are no decisions, they just kept on flying, and then we killed them. We made decisions during Apollo, critical decisions, because we had the leadership that instilled in us to do that. The NASA culture kind of changed during shuttle, and I guess it was a little PC, and career ladders became a little important than the job, in my opinion. So no decisions were made that made any sense, any difference. If we had, we would have taken a look at the wing, and there was a scheme that was concocted to save the astronauts, and to send another shuttle up that was in processing already. Tell the guys to power down the Columbia, submarine warfare, power down, and go up and put the spacecraft belly to belly and transfer the crew of the suits. It was possible. There was a possibility if the decision had been made to pursue, but there wasn't. I'm so passionate about that.
I have a slightly different take on that, but and I had just left the agency. Well, no, that was Challenger. I wasn't in the agency when Columbia happened, but I got involved in it because I was asked to be. And what happened in Columbia was an interesting result. What happened is foam came off of the external tank. You know, the big orange tank that you saw? That was a foam that was put on the tank. It was like a thermos bottle, because you had liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen inside, and you were trying to keep it as cold as you could. That foam was slightly heavier than styrofoam, like your ice chest might be made of. Slightly more dense. And you pick up a chunk this big, it felt like it probably weighed a half pound or something. So it was a little thicker. A big chunk came off during ascent, right after liftoff. And it had happened before. We had more foam on other tanks come off, because it would become debonded and slip off. It may be a chunk this big. Well, there was a pretty big chunk they saw go flying by, but the wing was way behind them. They couldn't see that leading edge, and it's kind of like being in front of a jet and you can't see the wing behind you. And I recall when it happened, they called several of us in to look at it, and we said, it'd be pretty interesting if that thing poked a hole in anything, because the reinforced on the leading edge of the wing was reinforced carbon. It was about this thick, and it was hard as steel. I picked up one panel one time. I could barely pick it up, and it wasn't very big. It was really, really hard. And so I think the first reaction was, the foam is not going to penetrate that. But guess what? In doing a test after the accident, after it was over, we went to San Antonio, outfit called Southwest Research, and they calculated that foam was moving at about 800 feet per second.
545 miles an hour.
And so it was going pretty fast when it hit the wing. And it did knock a hole in a piece of reinforced carbon. That was a surprise to me. Now, I know what Si says about you could have done some sort of concocted story or concocted solution. But it would have been extremely difficult because, for one thing, never had trained for it, never had done anything like it. It would require monumental effort, and I'm not so sure we could have done it in time to get the vehicle down, but that's an argument that could be looked at. I think one thing we learned in all of this is that every time we made a big mistake, even those that killed astronauts, Challenger was another one, we learned something from it that will make us better in the future. And we got to learn from your mistakes as well as your successes. So I really think it was a tragedy and it was bad. I'm not sure we could have saved them, but that's just a slightly different take I have on. But your point is
We
well
would have
made.
looked.
Yeah.
By the way,
And they did look afterwards. They used an arm to go out and look at leading edges.
couldn't reach it, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
couldn't reach it, but they could look at the camera.
even with the RMS, we couldn't see it. I think Story Musgrave had this scheme of having them he'd go outside, have his legs duct taped to the end of the RMS so he could go look over the edge. But just my passion, I think during Apollo, we had the same culture then. We would have looked, at least looked. And by the way, that was a 1.7 pound chunk of foam that came off. It was off the bipod area where the front of the shuttle was attached to the tank. And it had come off several times before, and of course we got away with it.
Yeah.
This time you had a nearly 2 pound chunk of foam flying at 545 mile an hour and hit the port wing. And we saw the piece come off. We didn't know what it was, right?
Right. They just
We
were
didn't
flying by.
know what it
we saw it on
was.
this videotape.
And you wouldn't want a feather to hit you in the face at 545 miles an hour. But the rationalization was, it's just light foam, it's dust, it wouldn't hurt anything. Famous last words.
Let me add 5
Anyway,
seconds.
that's all I gotta say about that.
I've done a lot of failure analysis for other things, and when you look at aircraft or spacecraft, there's several regions, areas, design 5 years ago, 10 years ago, manufacturing 3 or 4 years ago, finally flight tests, finally then operations by the time we get it. Some of those decisions are made that are down the chain that you just don't know about. And typically they say there's about 7 times that something happens in that chain that eventually gets to the failure. And sometimes you have the chance to change it,